The wind came in hot from the basin, throwing grit like a handful of nails against the clapboard fronts of Copper Ridge. It scoured the street clean of mercy, and that was why the men gathered, because a town that lets the wind do its hard work will let any man do worse. An upended freight crate served as the auction block. On top of it, a girl stood with a burlap sack tied over her head and shoulders, the coarse weave pressed against her cheekbones every time she breathed. Her wrists were bound with a lariat cut from a roping coil. Bare ankles bruised, a simple travel dress scuffed to the color of ash. Fresh contract the auctioneer called voice greased with a salesman's lilt. Strong back, no attachments. We'll start at $20 and go as far as the Lord permits. Laughter, boots nudging the dirt. A few faces turned aside as if refusing to watch might make them cleaner. Most faces didn't bother. Jonah Hale stood in the shade of the feed store awning, one thumb hooked beneath the strap of a saddlebag and the other hand resting near his belt. Not on the revolver, not even close, just near enough to remind his temper it had a place to sit down. He'd ridden in with bruised knuckles and 2 days of dust hammered into his coat, meaning to buy barley salt and a box of nails. Instead, he was buying trouble. He could feel it walking up his spine like a mule with iron shoes. 20, someone shouted. 25, 30, 35. The numbers ticked upward on a broken clock that no one thought to mend. He told himself to turn away. The Hale place was 10 hard miles out, juniper and stone-stubborn cattle and wilder horses. Every dollar he saved was a fence post, a winter bag of grain, a hinge for a corral gate. And yet, 50 barked a man in a slick frock coat, the kind of shine that didn't come from work. Victor Bain's Copper Ridge's mineral king without the courtesy of the title, a man who swallowed claims and spit out widowers. Jonah stepped forward before his sense could drag him back. 75. Heads turned. Baines chewed the number as if it were gristle. 100. 150, Jonah said louder now, because his voice was all he had to lean on. The auctioneer's smile gilded over like bad paint. We have a gentleman with conviction. Baines' stare cut like mica. 200. Jonah didn't look at him. He looked at the girl's ankles, at the rope resting on the delicate rise of the bone. 300, he said, and it wasn't even his number so much as the sound of it that startled the crowd quiet. A slow murmur rolled through the cluster of men, out past the hitching rail, up the hillside where the first Joshua trees bent at odd angles, like old men watching the town forget itself. Baines tilted his head as if he'd heard a joke he didn't get. You're bidding like a man who thinks he can win against arithmetic. Hale. 300, Jonah repeated, and this time he did look at Baines. You going higher, or are you just here to make the air cheaper? The auctioneer clapped his hands together, delighted by the bite. 300 once, twice. Leave it, Baines said lightly. Let the saint have his prize. He'll learn the bill always comes due. Sold to Mr. Jonah Hale. The gavel was a stick against a crate, the sound small and brittle in the big bright afternoon. Jonah counted the money from a pouch stiff with sweat and long days. It was meant to buy a windmill head come spring, meant to replace the door on the tack shed, meant to be anything but this. He caught the girl's rope gentle as he could and let her down from the crate. The auctioneer's wink slid across his shoulder like a slug. If she kicks, you know where to bring her back. Jonah didn't answer. The crowd opened grudgingly, then closed behind them, swallowing the block and the grin and the town hall. He didn't talk until the noise of Copper Ridge folded into the distance, until it was all sun-baked earth and the far white teeth of the mountains, until even the flies seemed to fall away. He stopped by a limb-twisted mesquite and turned to the girl. I'm going to take that sack off, he said, keeping his voice steady the way you do with a spooked colt. No harm meant. She didn't move. He slid the knot loose and lifted the rough fabric free. Her hair spilled out first auburn, touched by sun frayed at the ends from travel, and worse, the face beneath it was too pale for Arizona, Boston maybe, or St. Louis, and scraped with road dirt in the hollows, but the bones were there. A fine line of cheek, a mouth set, like someone who knew how to hold pain without letting it spill. Her eyes were the thing that held him, gray that caught the sky and dragged it down inside. For a breath, the desert went quiet. In another life, he might have said something foolish about angels. In this one, he cleared his throat. I'm Jonah Hale. The girl's first breath without the sack was quick and sharp. The second was steadier. May Fallon, she said, voice raw around the edges, but clear. A city syllable or two hung in it, softened by miles. I bought your contract, he said, hating the word as it left him. To keep it out of the wrong hands. You're free to walk whichever way suits you, but if you've got nowhere, my ranch sits west. There's a spare room and work that's only as hard as it needs to be." She looked past him at the road that meant anywhere, and at the low blue wall of mountains that meant nowhere, and then at him again. Her hands, freed from the rope, rubbed instinctively at the raw bands the lariat had left. "You believe I'm your problem?" she asked softly, not accusing. More like testing the truth for bruises. "I believe you're not theirs," he said. A ghost of a smile flickered and went. "Then I'll ride with you for now, until I can write a letter and hear a reply." Her eyes shifted as if she'd just thought better of telling him to whom. He nodded. "You can have my horse. I'll lead him." "I can walk," she said. "Give me your canteen and something to put on my head and I'll keep up." He shrugged out of his duster and shook free his bandana, knotting it for her into a shade against the heat. She took the canteen, drank in careful swallows, handed it back with a thank you that sounded like a habit taught by a mother long gone. They set off. The horse followed with the resigned patience of a good animal who knew when a human day had got itself tangled. They didn't talk much the first mile. The desert did it for them, cicadas sawing away at the sun, a kestrel throwing its shadow loose across the flats, the occasional sting of dust in the teeth. Jonah wanted to ask the questions that mattered. Who hurt you? Where were you bound? Who will miss you if you never show? And he didn't, because some answers break the person holding them if you lift too fast. At a dry wash, they came upon a fallen saguaro rib. Jonah nudged it to the side to make the descent easier. May watched his hands. There was a way she watched measured skill counting that belonged to someone who had worked in rooms other than kitchens and had learned quickly through consequence. When they climbed out of the wash on the far bank, she said, "What do you raise on your place?" "Horses, mostly. Some longhorns winter, depending," he said. "Break mustangs and sell them sound. Fences go up slower than I want." She nodded, eyes faintly amused. "Fences always do? You'd know about ranch work." "My uncle ran a livery back east," she said, "and that east hung on the air like a window on a different season. I learned harness before needlepoint. I can muck a stall tally feed and set a bone if I have to." He glanced over. "Set a bone." "Dr. Father," she said, and looked away as if the words had slipped out of their own will. "I helped after Mama died. Not licensed, if that matters to anybody out here." "Out here," Jonah said, "a steady hand matters more than paper. The nearest doctor lives behind 2 days of bad road." They walked another half-mile. The sun slipped toward a redder register, gentler, but meaner if you didn't know what darkness did to desert travel. Jonah handed her jerky from his saddlebag. She took it and chewed like someone who had remembered to be polite, even when hungry. After a time, she said, "The man in the coat." "Baines. Victor Baines. He owns what he can buy and scares what he can't. Either way, it's his after. You just made him an enemy for me. He'd have been your enemy without my help." Jonah offered the truth easy, the way a farrier shows a palm to prove there's nothing hidden there. May took that in and nodded once, as if a ledger in her head had balanced. "Then we're even." "No," he said, surprising himself. "We're not even yet." By late afternoon, the land rose into broken country chala and catclaw, and pockets of grass the color of old coins. When the roof of his place showed a single long room added onto one squared by a short porch and shaded by a cottonwood, the horse pricked his ears and nickered low. That home sound walked right through Jonah's ribs. He stopped at the well and hauled a bucket, offered it to the horse first, then to May. She washed her hands and face and pushed damp hair off her forehead. In the clearer light, the careful set of her mouth looked more like resolve than fear. Inside the room was poor but kept swept boards, a table, honest as a handshake, a shelf with the things a man keeps when he can only keep so many, 2 books, a small framed daguerreotype, a tin of playing cards, a child's wooden horse with one ear, whittled too thin. He caught her glance on the photograph and felt the old ache raise its usual tide. 2 people in it, a woman with a kind mouth, a boy with hale eyes. The woman already gone to fever. The boy his brother Nate gone to Kansas or God. Letters had stopped 2 winters back. The hurt never stops, only learns to sit in the corner while you go about your chores. "You can have the bed," he said. "I've got a blanket roll that knows the floor well. There's a lock for the door if it helps you sleep. Supper will be a mercy if I don't ruin it. I can cook," she said the words soft, not boastful, "or at least make whatever you're making less ruined." He found himself smiling. "Then we'll be partners against the pot." While beans softened and coffee hissed its small song, May moved through the room with the gentle competence of someone who needed to move to keep her thoughts from crowding. She folded his scattered shirts into a neater stack, aired a quilt on the line, set a tin cup of wildflowers in the window, without asking if it was the kind of thing a man wanted. He didn't mind. The place looked less like it was waiting for something. They ate at the table, the food plain but honest. After he set a lamp and trimmed its wick, desert night came quick, thrown like a blanket. Coyotes tuned their throats. The wind gentled into the bigger dark. I need to write a letter, May said quietly, to a cousin in San Francisco. Her gaze flinched when she named the city as if she were giving away a rook in a match that was already going long. You can write it here. I'll take it to town in the morning, he said. No one will read it before it rides the wire. She hesitated, then thank you. He poured the last of the coffee and drank it black. May, he asked careful, do you have someone I should send a second letter to if this one doesn't bring you a road? Her hand tightened on the cup. She looked at the lamp's small flame and nodded him. I had a sister, she said. She took the western road first. The telegram I sent after her was returned without deliver. Baines's men rode the same trail she did. She drew a breath that hurt to hear. I came to find where the trail broke. Jonah stared past the open door into the darkness that was all edges and no endpoints. He could feel the night listening. Then we'll look where it broke, he said simply, but not tonight. May nodded once. She rose, folded her hands to still them, and went to the door of the small room he'd pointed out as hers. At the threshold, she stopped and turned. Whatever comes of debts, she said, I won't be the thing that ruins your life. You won't be the thing, he answered. Life does its own ruining. Something like a real smile touched her face just briefly, and then she closed the door and the latch made the quietest sound in the wide Arizona dark. Outside, the wind moved the cottonwood leaves like rain that never falls. Inside, Jonah blew out the lamp and lay down on the floor with the old blanket. His knuckles ached. His throat felt dry as bone. But under all that something unexpected steadied a feeling like a gate finally hung on true hinges. He didn't pray much. Still, he found himself saying the kind of words a man says to his own breath. Let tomorrow be slower. Let the trail make sense. Let the contract mean an end, not a beginning. And if there's a bill to pay, let it be one he knew he'd pay the moment he said 300. Morning in Arizona didn't rise gently. It came with a slap of sunlight that beat through the single window and laid its weight across the table. Jonah was already outside, shoulders bent to the pump handle, drawing water into a trough for the Mustangs corralled out back. The animals nosed at him, ears flicking their hides slick with desert dust. He moved among them with the practiced economy of a man who'd spent years gentling wild things. When he turned, May was standing on the porch, her borrowed bandana still tied across her hair, her eyes squinting against the blaze of the horizon. She looked smaller in daylight, but not fragile, more like a blade that hadn't been whetted yet. He lifted a hand. Mornin'. She gave a brief nod. Smells like coffee. There's a pot on the stove. Help yourself. Or better yet, pour me some before I drop dead of thirst. For the first time since he'd seen her face, she almost laughed. It wasn't much, just the corner of her mouth tilting up before she disappeared inside, but it carried the weight of a small victory. He leaned on the fence rail, let the horses nudge his palm, and thought about what he'd done. $300. Enough to double his grazing land. Enough to keep a roof over him through 2 winters. Enough to matter. He'd thrown it on a fire because he couldn't stomach watching Baines lay his hands on someone who didn't belong to him. The door creaked. May returned with 2 tin cups, steam lifting from both. She passed one through the fence. You're reckless, she said plainly. He accepted the cup, sipped. Bitter, scalding, and welcome, so I've been told. You spent a fortune. For me. I spent it to stop him. Jonah took another drink. You just happened to be in the way of him. She studied him over the rim of her cup. That's not a comfort. It's the truth. Silence stretched, filled with the squeak of corral boards and the shuffle of hooves. Finally, May said, what happens when he comes for you? You embarrassed him. Men like that don't let embarrassment breathe long. Jonah set his cup on the fence post. Then he comes. I've had worse neighbors. But he hadn't, not really. The worst he'd known before was weather and loneliness. Men like Victor Baines were a different kind of storm. By noon, Jonah saddled his horse. May stood with her arms folded tight across her chest. You're leaving. Going into town. Need salt nails, lamp oil, and your letter. He held up the folded page she'd written in a hand so precise it looked like it belonged in a ledger, not on a ranch table. The address read, San Francisco in clean strokes. I'll see it on the wire. Should I go with you? He shook his head. Not today. You've had enough staring eyes for a while. Hank, my ranch hand, ought to be back this evening. He'll keep you company until I return. I can manage myself. I don't doubt it, but it'll be easier if someone else hears a knock before you do. May looked away, but she didn't argue further. Jonah mounted up. Lock the door if you get uneasy. Shotgun hangs by the jamb. Her eyes snapped back to him. You expect trouble? I live in Arizona, he said simply, then kicked his horse into motion. The ride to town was a ribbon of dust and memory. Every mile, Jonah counted the coins he didn't have anymore. He thought about the windmill he wouldn't buy, the fence posts he'd mend with splintered cedar instead of cut pine. He thought, too, about the girl at his ranch, May Fallon, with her quiet voice and her city-learned poise that sat strange against the hard edges of frontier country. Copper Ridge bustled when he arrived. Wagons lined the street, miners shouted at each other across saloons, and the forge hammer clanged a rhythm against the anvil. Jonah tied his horse, stepped into the telegraph office, and slid May's letter across the counter. San Francisco urgent, he told the operator. The man adjusted his spectacles, scanned the address, and raised a brow. Expensive wire. You got coin. Jonah pushed bills forward. Send it clean. As the operator tapped out the code, Jonah felt the weight of each word leaving his pocket. But when he imagined May's eyes reading a reply, the expense seemed less like loss and more like insurance. Outside, the air shifted. A hush ran through the street like the pause before thunder. Jonah turned and saw Baines leaning against the saloon post, a cigar burning low between his fingers. Two of his men flanked him, broad and ugly as hired fists. Well, Baines drawled, smoke curling from his mouth. The philanthropist rancher. Jonah kept his shoulders loose. Victor. $300, Baines said, savoring the number. For a stray girl you'll regret feeding. She's not your concern. Oh, she's my concern. You embarrassed me in front of half the town. You think they'll forget the sight of Jonah Hale playing hero? You'll pay one way or another. Jonah's hand twitched near his belt. Not to draw, just to remind himself the Colt was there if the talk died bad. Maybe he said, but not today. He turned his back on Baines. That was the real insult. Walking away. The kind that festered in a man's pride until it bled. Back at the ranch, dusk painted the sky in copper streaks. May was on the porch, shotgun across her knees. When Jonah dismounted, she looked at him sharp. You saw him? He nodded. He saw me too. Her knuckles whitened on the stock. Then it's begun. It began the moment I said 300. Jonah untied his horse and led it toward the barn. We'll be ready when he decides the price is due. May stood, her silhouette cut against the rising stars. I won't be the reason you lose everything. Jonah paused, one hand on the gate. You're not the reason, he said. You're the choice. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that auction block, May didn't look like a victim. She looked like someone who might yet choose back. The next morning broke cooler. A thin veil of cloud stretched across the desert sky. Jonah woke on the floor, his blanket twisted around his legs, the smell of coffee already drifting from the stove. May stood near the firebox, her copper hair, braided back sleeves, rolled past her elbows. She looked like she had always belonged to the space, as though his small house had been waiting for her hands to arrange it. He pushed himself up, rubbing sleep from his face. You're up early. I couldn't sleep, she said. I kept hearing horses in the dark. Thought maybe Baines had decided not to wait. Jonah reached for his boots. If he comes, he won't come quiet. The desert doesn't teach patience to men like him. She poured him a cup, slid it across the table. Then you should know I won't run if he does. He studied her. No tremor in her hand, no quaver in her voice. A girl bought on an auction block yesterday now, claiming her place against the storm. Something in his chest shifted. Running's not always cowardice, he said softly. Sometimes it's survival. Then I've survived enough, she answered, and that ended the argument. By midday, Hank returned. His arrival was marked by the slow clop of a sway-backed gelding and the steady whistle of an old tune. Hank dismounted stiffly, knees creaking as much as the saddle leather, and eyed May with mild surprise. Jonah, he said, tugging his hat brim, seems I've missed some excitement. This is May Fallon, Jonah introduced. She'll be staying a while. Hank nodded, accepting without judgment, and offered May a calloused hand. Welcome to the Double H, such as it is. Double R, Jonah corrected with a faint grin. Double H sounds better, Hank muttered, then glanced at Jonah's face, reading the tension etched there. Baines. Jonah jerked his chin toward the horizon. He won't let it go. Hank spat into the dirt. He never does. Then we'll keep watch. May listened quietly, her gaze moving between the two men. She seemed to file away their words like a physician, jotting notes, measured, deliberate, waiting for symptoms to reveal the sickness underneath. That night, Jonah lit a lantern and unrolled his own scraps of memory letters from his brother Nate. Edges, worn ink, faded. He spread them on the table while May sat across from him with a small needle and thread mending one of his shirts. Family, she asked. He nodded. Brother wrote from Kansas. Then the letter stopped. I had a sister, May said, eyes lowered to the fabric. She went west with a wagon train. I followed, hoping to find her. But her hands stilled. No letters came back either. Jonah folded Nate's words carefully, tucked them into the envelope that had carried them through storms and years. Maybe the desert swallowed too many letters. It's got an appetite. She looked at him, half a smile in her eyes. Or maybe it delivers them when the time is right. The room went quiet except for the scratch of thread and the hiss of the lamp. For a moment, Jonah imagined what it might be like if she stayed, if silence like this was the shape of evenings to come. 2 days later, the telegraph boy rode up with a dust-coated envelope. Jonah met him at the gate, paid him a nickel, and carried the note inside. May waited by the table, her hands pressed together so tightly her knuckles paled. He offered her the folded sheet. It's from San Francisco. She opened it slowly, eyes tracing each word. Relief first, then confusion, then a shadow. My cousin has moved east. Chicago. No address left behind. Her voice cracked. There's no one waiting for me. Jonah set a hand on the back of a chair, grounding himself. He'd half expected it, but hearing the truth laid flat between them was something else. Then you'll make your waiting here, until you decide otherwise. May lowered the paper. I don't want to be a burden. You've already mended my shirt, cleaned my house, cooked better beans than I've ever managed. That's not a burden. That's a miracle. For the first time, she laughed, a sound thin with exhaustion, but real. Then your standards are pitifully low. Maybe, Jonah said. But miracles don't usually come cheap. Mine cost $300. Her smile faded, seriousness sliding back in. And Baines won't forget it. No, Jonah admitted. He'll come knocking sooner or later. That evening, Hank sat by the fire, whittling at a piece of mesquite, while Jonah and May cleaned dishes. The old ranch hand watched them, eyes narrowed with thought. Finally, he said, a man doesn't spend that kind of money without deciding something. Jonah looked up startled. Deciding what? That maybe life's too long to live alone. May's face flushed crimson. Jonah set down the tin plate too hard, making it clatter. It wasn't like that. Hank shrugged. Could be, or could become. Either way, you best be ready for the storm you've bought. May excused herself soon after retreating to her small room. Jonah sat staring at the embers, Hank's words echoing louder than the coyotes outside. At dawn, riders appeared on the ridge, two silhouettes cut black against the rising sun. Baines's men. They didn't approach, just watched, then turned back toward town. Jonah gripped the fence rail until the wood creaked. May stepped onto the porch, pale but steady. He's watching us. Yes, Jonah said, and he's waiting. She came down the steps, stood beside him, close enough their shoulders brushed. Then we wait too, but we don't hide. For the first time in years, Jonah felt something more dangerous than fear, heavier than anger. He felt the sharp beginning of hope, raw, reckless and impossible to put back once loosed. And hope, he realized, was its own kind of war. By the third week, the rhythm of life at the Double R had steadied into something almost normal. May swept floors, tended the small herb patch she had discovered behind the barn, and wrote lists of supplies she claimed would be useful for healing aloe willow bark laudanum if it could be found. Jonah worked the horses with Hank, coaxing the younger Mustangs into halters, training their gait until they would sell for cavalry prices. In the evenings, they ate together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with May telling stories of Boston winters while Jonah listened, with the patience of a man unaccustomed to talk in his house. Yet normal was only the skin of things. Beneath the threat of Victor Baines ran like a current. They saw his riders on the ridges at least twice a week. They found boot tracks near the creek where none should have been. And once, when Jonah rode into town alone, a note had been nailed to his saddle. You owe more than money. He burned it without letting May see. One afternoon, Hank shuffled into the house with a grimace. Jonah, there's smoke on the horizon. Big fire looks like up near Bain's workings. Jonah stepped onto the porch, shielding his eyes. A column of black rose beyond the far ridge. Could be an accident in the mine. Or Hank muttered could be someone sending a message. May came to the doorway, apron dusted with flour. A fire like that could hurt families. Don't his miners live in shacks near the pit? They do, Jonah said carefully. Then you can't just watch. He turned to her. If I ride in it, looks like I started it. She crossed her arms, chin lifting. And if you don't, people burn. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Jonah saw the set of her shoulders, the unflinching steel in her eyes. She was right. He swore under his breath, grabbed his hat, and called for Hank to saddle the horses. When they reached the mining camp, chaos had already claimed it. Miners' wives hauled water in buckets, children coughed in the smoke, and a line of men beat at the flames with wet burlap. Jonah swung down from his horse, barked orders like a man used to being obeyed. Hank joined the bucket line while May dashed to a coughing child and checked his breathing. By nightfall, the fire was beaten back. Several shacks had collapsed into embers, but no lives were lost. May's hair was streaked with soot, her dress singed at the hem, yet she kept moving among the injured, bandaging burns, with strips torn from her own petticoat calming frightened mothers boiling water in dented tin pots. Jonah watched her with a strange ache in his chest. In the firelight, she seemed transformed, not the frightened girl from the auction block, but a woman who could steady a town with her hands alone. When the work was done, Victor Baines appeared. His coat was ash-stained, his face dark with fury. He looked from May to Jonah, his lip curling. You think saving my camp makes you a hero? Jonah straightened. I think it makes me human. You cost me $300, Baines snapped. And now you parade around my men like their savior. Don't mistake gratitude for loyalty. They work for me. They'll remember who stood in the smoke with them, Jonah said evenly. Baines stepped closer, his voice low enough only Jonah heard. You've bought yourself a war, Hale. And wars burn everything, land cattle people. Think about what you're willing to lose. Jonah didn't answer. He turned back to May, who was kneeling beside a miner with blistered hands. She looked up at him, her expression weary but resolute, and he realized what he was willing to lose everything but her. They rode home under a bruised sky. May swayed in the saddle from exhaustion. Jonah guided his horse close, steadying her with a hand. You shouldn't have come, he said softly. If I hadn't, children would have died. You put yourself in Baines's path. Her head lifted, eyes catching the moonlight. I won't live in fear of him, and neither should you. He wanted to argue. Instead, he found himself whispering, I don't fear for me. Her gaze held his, steady and unreadable. Then she looked away, and the silence between them said more than words could manage. At the ranch, Hank collapsed into his bunk, muttering about old bones. Jonah stabled the horses, then found May sitting on the porch, her soot-streaked face turned toward the stars. I thought I was coming west to find my sister, she said quietly. But maybe I was meant to find a different kind of family. Jonah lowered himself beside her. The night air smelled of smoke and sage. Family isn't always blood. She turned her head, studying him. Then what is it? People you'd spend $300 on, he said. For a heartbeat, she was silent. Then slowly she reached out and laid her hand over his. Jonah's pulse thundered in his ears. He didn't move, didn't speak, afraid the moment would shatter. But May's hand stayed light but certain. And in that small touch, he felt something stronger than fire or fury, something worth every risk Baines could summon. Inside, the lamp guttered low. Outside, coyotes sang to the dark. And between them, on a weathered porch in Arizona, two lives bent quietly toward each other, unaware that the true test was still riding hard across the horizon. 3 nights after the fire, Jonah woke to the sound of dogs barking down in the draw. The hair on his arms lifted. That wasn't coyotes, the sound carried warning, not hunger. He rolled from his blanket, reached for the colt on the chair, and eased to the window. Moonlight silvered the yard. The cottonwood leaves shook in a wind too light to stir them. Beyond the corral, 5 riders waited still as carved stone. He whispered into the dark Baines. A door hinge creaked. May stepped into the main room, the hem of her nightdress brushing the floor. She had the shotgun in her hands, her braid loose down her back. I heard them. Jonah turned. Stay behind me. She shook her head once. I won't hide. The riders advanced, hooves muffled by sand. Jonah slipped out the door, May following. Hank was already in the yard, trousers half-buttoned, his old Spencer rifle propped against his shoulder. His voice was calm. Looks like we got company. Victor Baines reined forward, cigar glowing like a red eye in the night. Evening hail. Thought I'd pay a neighborly call. Jonah planted his boots on the porch steps. Neighbors don't bring hired guns. They're witnesses, Baines said smoothly. To see you hand back what's mine. His gaze shifted to May. Jonah felt her stiffen behind him. His voice came low but hard. She isn't yours. Not now, not ever. Baines spat into the dirt. Everything in Copper Ridge answers to me. Contracts, claims, flesh, it all comes round in the end. You think $300 changes that? $300 bought her freedom, Jonah said. Baines laughed, sharp as a breaking board. Freedom's a word men like you can't afford. Let me take her off your hands before she ruins you. May stepped forward, then surprising them both. Her voice carried like a bell struck in the dark. I was never yours to sell, and I'll never be yours to claim. If Jonah hadn't outbid you, I'd have spit in your face before I let you lay a hand on me. The men behind Baines shifted uncomfortable. Nobody talked to Victor that way, not, and lived easy. Baines' smile turned cruel. Bold tongue for a girl in borrowed rags. He flicked his cigar into the dust. I'll be back by week's end. Think hard, Hale. Decide what's worth dying for. He wheeled his horse, his men following like shadows peeled from the earth. Soon they were gone, leaving only the churn of hoof prints and the reek of cheap tobacco. Inside, May slammed the shotgun onto the table. He'll kill you. Jonah holstered the Colt. Not if I'm faster. Don't joke. Her eyes shone too bright. You can't outdraw every man he throws at you. I don't need to, Jonah said. I just need to outlast him. Hank lowered himself into a chair, joints groaning. Baines won't come alone next time. He'll bring half the town if it suits him. Jonah nodded grimly. Then we give him reason to think twice. Over the next days, work on the ranch turned into preparation. Hank repaired the fences closest to the road, setting them sturdy enough to slow a charge. Jonah moved the horses deeper into the canyon pasture, where the walls gave natural protection. May gathered herbs, brewed tonics, and quietly set up a corner of the tack room with bandages and boiled water. One evening, she came to Jonah as he salted harness leather. I know what you're doing, she said. He didn't look up, keeping us ready. No, she pressed. You're planning to meet him gun to gun. Jonah's hands stilled. If it comes to that? Her eyes searched his face. And if you die, then Hank looks after the stock. And you? He forced the words out. Nar, you ride to San Francisco or wherever you choose. Free. She caught his arm fierce as a hawk's grip. Don't you dare make me a widow before I've even decided what I am to you. His chest tightened. He covered her hand with his own rough palm against her slender fingers. Then decide quick, May Fallon, because Baines won't wait long. The storm broke on a Sunday. Church bells in town had barely finished ringing when the first rider galloped up the trail shouting that Baines was calling Hale out in the square. By noon, half of Copper Ridge had gathered miners, merchants, even mothers with children in their arms. A duel promised blood, and blood was cheaper than whiskey for drawing a crowd. Jonah rode in slow duster, flaring behind him. May sat behind him on the saddle against his protests. Hank trailed on the mule rifle across his lap. Baines was already there, standing broad in front of the saloon, revolver at his hip, a sneer carved into his face. You came, he said. You called, Jonah answered. May slid off the horse, stood at Jonah's side. Murmurs rippled, no woman dared stand in a duel circle. Baines barked a laugh. She wants to watch you die. May's voice cut sharp. No, I want the town to watch a bully fall. Gasps shivered through the crowd. Jonah's hand hovered above the Colt. His heartbeat drummed, slow, deliberate. He remembered every fence post his lost money could have bought, every mile of dust, every night he'd slept alone. And he remembered lifting a burlap sack and seeing eyes that made the desert feel less empty. The sheriff dragged from his whiskey bottle for once, raised a hand. On my count, 3. The square went silent. 2. A hawk cried above. May's fingers brushed Jonah's sleeve, a whisper of touch. 1. Hands moved. Guns cleared leather. The street of Copper Ridge held its breath. Dust spiraled between the boots of men and the hems of women's skirts. Children clutched at their mothers' aprons, too frightened to cry. Every eye fixed on the 2 figures in the center, Jonah Hale, broad-shouldered, steady, his hand hanging loose near the Colt, and Victor Baines, puffed up with rage and liquor, his fingers twitching against the grip of a revolver, polished more than practiced. The sheriff barked, draw. 2 flashes tore the silence. Baines' pistol went wide, the bullet smashing glass in the general store window. Jonah's shot cracked like lightning and found its mark. The mine owner jerked backward, his cigar spinning from his mouth, and crumpled onto the dirt with a groan. For an instant, the whole town froze. Then voices erupted, shouts, curses, prayers. Women pulled children close, men rushed forward. Jonah stood rooted, smoke drifting from his barrel. May was at his side in an instant, pressing a hand to his arm, as if to steady not his body, but his soul. Baines lay, gasping crimson spreading through his vest. "Get him inside!" May ordered, her voice sharp with command. Startled miners obeyed, hauling their fallen master toward the saloon. Jonah blinked at her. "May, he'd have killed me." She met his eyes, fierce. "And if he lives, the town will know you didn't come here to murder, but to survive." Jonah holstered the Colt's shoulders, sagging with a weight heavier than recoil. Inside, the saloon tables were cleared for a makeshift operating bed. May rolled up her sleeves, seized bandages from startled onlookers, boiled water, barked for clean cloth. The room stank of blood and whiskey. Jonah followed, standing guard at the door, while May knelt over the man who had sworn to destroy them. "Hold him," she snapped, and two miners pinned Baines' thrashing arms. She cut open his shirt, probed the wound with swift, sure fingers. Jonah winced at the sight. Hours dragged. At last, May straightened, soaked in sweat and stained scarlet. "He'll live," she said hoarsely. The bullet missed his heart, but he'll carry the scar. A murmur rippled through the room. Some cursed, others sighed with relief. Jonah could feel the town's eyes shifting, reevaluating. Baines was not invincible, and the stranger with the steady gun had spared him more than once. The sheriff cleared his throat. "It's self-defense, no doubt. No charges." He looked at May with something like respect. "You saved a man who'd see you ruined. Folks won't forget that." Night settled heavy when they returned to the ranch. Hank clapped Jonah's shoulder. "You shot straighter than I figured you would, boy." Jonah only shook his head. "Doesn't feel like victory." May washed at the basin, hands trembling now that the work was done. Jonah poured water over her fingers, careful as if touching glass. "You should rest." "So should you." She lifted her gaze, meeting his steady brown eyes. "When he drew that gun, I thought," her voice broke. "I thought I'd lose the only man who ever looked at me like I wasn't for sale." The words hung between them like smoke that refused to lift. Jonah's throat tightened. Slowly, he took her hand, calloused against delicate. "And I thought I'd never get the chance to tell you. I can't imagine this ranch without you in it." She swallowed hard. "Jonah." "Don't answer now," he murmured. "But know this, if you stay, it's not out of debt or pity. It's because you choose to." May's eyes shimmered, but she nodded. For the first time since the auction block, she let her head rest against his chest. Outside, the coyotes howled. But for once, Jonah felt no fear in their voices, only the echo of survival. Days turned into weeks. Baines lingered in town, recovering under May's reluctant care. His influence weakened. Miners grumbled. Merchants haggled without fear. And May, now called Doc Fallon by women in the street, opened a small room above the hotel as a clinic. She treated fevers, set bones, delivered children, and little by little the town began to turn toward her more than toward the mine baron. Jonah watched with quiet pride. Each evening when he rode in to escort her home, he saw faces nod with respect, as if recognizing a new balance of power in Copper Ridge. But danger had not vanished. One evening as they locked the clinic door, a voice slithered from the alley. "Hero and healer. Makes me sick." A pistol gleamed in the dark. Jonah shoved May behind him, hand flashing for his Colt. The thug fired first, close enough to tear Jonah's sleeve. Jonah answered faster, his bullet knocking the weapon from the man's grasp. He dragged the would-be killer into the light, recognized him as one of Baines's last loyal dogs. May's voice was icy. "If you come near us again, you won't leave breathing." The man bolted, terror stronger than hate. Jonah exhaled slowly. "It won't stop until Baines himself does." May's lips pressed thin, but she laid a hand on his arm. "Then we stand together. No more hiding." That night, by the fire, Jonah unfolded a plan. "If Baines presses further, we'll need allies. The townsfolk saw today who protects them. If we bring them into it, he can't bully the whole valley." May leaned closer, eyes reflecting the flames. "And if he comes at you again," Jonah gave a wry half-smile, "then I'll try to shoot straighter than last time." She touched his cheek, gentle but fierce. "Jonah Hale, don't you dare talk like your life is just another fence post. It's worth more than land, more than cattle, more than $300. The fire popped. He caught her hand and kissed the back of it, rough lips brushing soft skin. "Then maybe it's worth building something neither fire nor bullets can take." Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Outside, the desert night stretched endless, but inside, the flicker of the hearth cast enough light to suggest a future, fragile, dangerous, yet possible. The kind of future men and women carve from wilderness, not with luck, but with courage. And in that fragile glow, Jonah knew the duel in the street had not ended the war. It had only redrawn the lines. Winter came early to Copper Ridge. Frost clung to the eaves of the saloon, and the mountains wore white crowns that glimmered in the dawn. For weeks, Victor Baines had remained in town, his wound knitting, but his anger festering. The townsfolk whispered that he had grown meaner in his sickbed, snapping at anyone who dared bring him news of May Fallon tending the sick, or Jonah Hale riding through the street with a steadiness no threat could shake. May's clinic above the hotel had become a lifeline. Mothers brought feverish children, miners hobbled in with crushed hands, even the sheriff limped up once with a bullet graze. Each time she worked calm and certain, and each time the respect grew. Jonah watched from the corner, pride pulling at his chest. She had turned a life stolen on an auction block into a calling that belonged to her alone. But Baines was not a man to watch his grip slip quietly. It began with whispers, supplies missing from the general store, horses stolen from the livery miners approached with offers of gold to remind Hale who owns his town. Jonah heard the rumblings when he rode in for nails and seed. Hank confirmed it with a grim shake of his head. He's building to something. He'll strike where it hurts. That night, May confronted Jonah on the porch. He'll come here, to the ranch, to burn what you love until you bend. Jonah met her gaze. Then we'll give him nothing to bend. Her eyes softened, though her voice stayed sharp. I won't see you destroyed for me. Jonah took her hands rough against smooth. May Fallon, you were never the reason. You're the answer. She stared at him, and for the first time, she didn't argue. The attack came on a moonless night. The first warning was the frantic whinny of horses in the canyon pasture. Then the glow-orange tongues of fire licking at the barn roof. Jonah and Hank burst out, buckets in hand, but 3 riders thundered from the dark firing into the air. May's shotgun, braced against her shoulder, stepped into the yard and fired. The blast scattered one horse, sent its rider sprawling. Jonah charged the second man, dragging him from the saddle with fists hardened by years of work. Hank's rifle cracked, dropping a lantern before it reached the porch. Through the chaos, Baines appeared, pale and furious, revolver gleaming in his hand. His voice cut above the flames. Hail, tonight it ends. Jonah shoved his captive aside, turned to face him. Then end it here, Baines. No more threats, no more shadows. Just you and me. The town had gathered by then, drawn by firelight and gunshots. Miners, merchants' wives, children, they circled the yard, watching the duel write itself into the dirt. Baines sneered. You think they'll save you? They'll crawl back to me when you're gone. Jonah shook his head. Not anymore. They've seen who holds a gun for justice and who waves it for greed. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, breathless. Put it down, both of you. Neither moved. May's voice rang out, steady as steel. Victor Baines, you came to kill us. But I saved your life once when I could have let you die. Do you have so little honor you'd spit on that gift? For a flicker, something wavered in his eyes. Then rage swallowed it. Honor doesn't feed men. Power does. His pistol rose. Jonah's Colt cleared leather in the same heartbeat. 2 shots cracked sparks, splitting the night. Baines staggered, hand pressed to his chest. His revolver slipped from his grip, thudding into the dirt. He looked around at the crowd, at the miners, who no longer bowed, at the women, who no longer lowered their eyes. And in that final moment, he realized the town had already slipped from his grasp. He collapsed, the life leaking from him into the soil he had tried to own. Silence hung, broken only by the crackle of flames as neighbors rushed to douse the barn. The sheriff bent, checked Baines, and shook his head. It's done. May lowered her shotgun, shoulders trembling. Jonah holstered his Colt, the weight of survival heavier than the weapon itself. Then the townsfolk began to cheer, not raucous but strong, the sound of people exhaling years of fear. Hands clapped Jonah's back, voices called May's name, and in that chorus was the birth of something new, a town no longer chained to one man's cruelty. Weeks later, Copper Ridge looked different. The barn had been rebuilt stronger than before, with neighbors volunteering timber and sweat. May's clinic moved into a proper building near the square, its shelves stocked by donations from families she had healed. Jonah's ranch grew too, not in land but in spirit. Where once he had worked alone with Hank, now May's laughter filled the rooms, her touch softened the hard edges of his days. On a clear morning, with frost melting from the fence rails, Jonah stood with May in the corral. He took her hand, clumsy but determined. May, I bought your freedom once. But what I want now, what I'm asking, will you give me your life? Not because it's owed, but because you choose. Her eyes shone like the desert after rain. Jonah Hale, you didn't buy me. You found me, and yes, I choose. He pulled her close, kissed her with the certainty of a man who had finally come home. Hank whooped from the porch, pretending to spit tobacco to hide his grin. Spring bloomed in Arizona, wildflowers spilling across the canyons. Copper Ridge flourished, no longer a place ruled by fear, but by the stubborn resilience of its people. And at the Double R, a ranch once haunted by silence, laughter and love carried across the valley like a hymn. From a burlap sack on an auction block to the freedom of wide horizons, May's journey had found its end and its beginning in the arms of a man who chose her above land, above money, above fear. And together they chose a future neither desert fire nor bullet could take away.